Welcome into a Husker247 HoopsCast. First time in a while, and plenty of basketball things to dive into. I, of course, am Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson here at Husker247. And Nebraska adds their first addition to, I'm thinking, 5-6 players here in the transfer portal as they
Yep.
add Pryce Sandfort, the combo guard from Iowa that Nebraska fans know quite well. Probably know his brother Peyton a little bit better if we're honest there. Peyton's been around longer, bigger thorn in Nebraska's side. But Pryce Sandfort, 40% three-point shooter, making the trek over from Iowa to Nebraska. He's the third player from that Hawkeyes roster that'll be playing in the state of Nebraska for basketball in the upcoming season, as Josh Dix and Owen Freeman are at Creighton. But Nebraska picks up Pryce Sandfort. BC, this, I don't want to say it wasn't a surprise, because I think it was trending this direction kind of the whole time. But still, it was good for Nebraska to add a shooter right away, and a guy that has Big Ten experience and averaged 8 points last year in the Big Ten, and kind of feels like the Connor Essegian of the 2025 transfer portal haul. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, he was on the uptick too, I think, at the end of the season. He had 4 games in double figures to finish. He was 4 of 6 behind the arc in that game at PBA. And of course, that's the game where afterward, Fred said, we got to get more shooters in here. We've hit 100 less than a season ago. And Essegian in that particular game was off. He was 0 for 11. And it was a stark reminder, not that you needed it, but the difference between the two seasons was one guy could be off the year before and another guy could pick up the slack. And Sandfort at 40% is 3 percentage points higher than anybody on Nebraska's roster this year. Essegian was 37, which was actually the same as K-Say's last year.
What Bryce Williams from 3?
Bryce is at 36. 36.8 right now. And so so you have Sandfort. Now you have Mast, who hit 43s the year before. And so they've done a nice job adding to the options there. Obviously there's some Jamarcus Lawrence buzz out there since he's in the portal. And he was sort of part of that diversity where you feel like, okay, if this guy's off, this guy can be on. So I like the pickup. And now you got to surround it, I think, with some just complementary parts of, you're still sort of searching, I think, for like that dynamic, like who can take it to the whole guy. It's going to help a lot that Mast is going to spread the floor and is such a facilitator, as we've seen. That's going to, I think, open up a lot of back screens and stuff that wasn't quite as prevalent this year. But I like the pickup, but I'm a little bit maybe like you, and this is what you were getting at. I felt like it fit in all the ways. Like his dad was from Holdridge, played at Hastings. This family has a Nebraska connection, and Sandfort fits Hoiberg's offense really well. It felt like that as a recruit and all that stuff. But there was that dynamic of, is a Hawkeye going to jump over and be a Husker? We saw it with Aaron Eulis, but this is a different animal because I think Sandfort's a more high profile. I know he is.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Do you think, obviously we don't know what the rest of the roster looks like, but right now, do you anticipate a lineup where it's they add another guard and then it's Sandfort, Essegian, Burke, Mast, or do you see Sandfort or Essegian, one of them coming off of the bench? I almost wonder if those two and Sandfort and Essegian, you'd be better served. I just don't know. You're going to get all three of them or those two and Mast on the court at the same time, but I do wonder, like, as rotations and everything will start to form and we'll know what else they bring into the portal, I do wonder if he's going to be a starter for Nebraska next year, or if he isn't sort of in that role where initially he kind of comes off the bench and is sort of your bench scoring, bench shooting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting what other pieces are there, but I could see at least one of those guys being like your sixth guy. Essegian has basically taken on that role with this team, and so maybe that's just how it continues going forward. So yeah, I think that's possible. It's just I'd still love to see him add that point guard who's a little more dynamic at finishing than they've had. And I know Raleigh was playing on one foot since December. It's good that came out and people have the full story there. But I still think, you hope they could find something there that gives them a little more punch. But I like this addition. I mean, it just felt like a different world when you're hitting 2 less threes per game, which they basically were this season. And I
Think of how
know,
many games you win. You add 6
yeah,
more points.
yeah, it's incredible how that could change
They're like a
everything.
24 win team. I know you can't just do that because you got to subtract something else somewhere, but it is remarkable how different things look if they're just scoring 2
Yeah.
more threes a game.
And Iowa, flawed team, like, you don't want to just be like what Iowa was last year. I mean, that was like a 500 team. But when Nebraska in particular matched up against Iowa, I don't know if you felt this way, but I didn't love it because it's one of those games where it's like you can feel like you're better for even the game in Iowa City 30 minutes, but they're trading threes for your twos because of just they have more capability there. And at some point they're gonna get hot and it's gonna just wash away all the work you've put in to get like a 10-point lead. So um I am excited about just the idea of Nebraska being more of a threat behind the arc. I think it matters to the PBA environment too, like to have those guys who can get on a heater, which wasn't as
Mhm.
prominent this year. And you get the sandstorm playing in the background after a guy hits 2 or 3 in a row, and it kind of feeds into that PBA magic. And you can't relive 2 years ago and just run it back like that. But there was something to be said for that formula they had for creating momentum in their own building.
If I have any concern here, and this isn't even related to Sandfort, it would be the idea that this would be the best player that they pull out of the portal. Like
Mm,
to me, they have to get someone better than this because yes, you're adding Sandfort's 3-point shooting ability. They have so much to replace in Bryce and Joan. Like it, both in terms of their scoring, but also just the sheer athleticism of a Joan Gary. Like, and even then, I felt like at times they were pretty unathletic this year relative to what
yeah,
they were playing. They had to be smarter or had to do things differently to make up for the fact that physically they were either going to be not necessarily undersized, but less sudden, less likely to affect shots defensively because of it, less likely to get through traffic or finish at the rim because of it. So I like this addition a lot for what it means for the total roster. I am holding out hope that there are better players to come for Nebraska in the
yeah.
transfer portal. I
No, I'm
just
with I'm with you.
I think you have to replace that scoring somehow. I figured you would be, but I just want to make clear, like if this is the best addition Nebraska gets, it's you're gonna have to like squint to figure out how they're gonna be a lot better than they were this past year.
Yeah, they need a headliner to the class, and it could be the type of headliner too. I was actually gonna say use the word you don't need to squint, but like Bryce Williams 2 years ago was not like the most decorated guy or
Sure.
most highly rated guy, but when Nebraska picked him up, you you saw enough there. And you can go back and look at like a guy like Isaac Trotter writes for 24/7 Sports. Like he was like, this is a big addition, and some people weren't noticing it as much. But I kind of thought like I think Fred stole one here. Like you saw it pretty early, and then the first time he got over on the practice floor, it was like, yeah, they definitely stole one in Bryce Williams. So it could be that kind of guy. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be that addition where uh somebody in Florida notices that, oh, look who Nebraska got, but it's somebody really tied into basketball is like, yeah, that's a 3-level scorer and he is going to be good. He has momentum in his career. That yeah, they need that. They need that to add to Sandfort. And then if you get a nice piece like Jamarcus Lawrence with that,
Mhm.
then you're kind of cooking a little bit. So that's where we are. But this is at least it kind of you feel like, okay, they added one now. Like that you needed that that boost, I think. They've won a couple of games at this tournament, which we'll get to. but you needed that portal addition to sort of like get people like, all right, what's next now? Like that kind of feeling in the air.
Yeah, definitely. And you just want to keep trying to add as much talent as you can. It'll be interesting because we don't know who isn't going to be back from next year, though I feel pretty comfortable that Mast has already said he's going to return. I believe Burke will be back. And he's one of those guys that I think there's a lot more for him than what we saw at times this season. There were games where he was a really solid player. I mean, he had a really nice game against St. Mary's. He had some good games in Big Ten play, and then that injury kind of happened. And I felt like when he came back, he was just sort of pushing to try to contribute in a way that wasn't necessarily natural or there. It hasn't been that much better in the Crown for him, but I'm not ready to write him off. And so you have those two guys. You have Essegian, who, if he takes a step forward, if you get first half Connor Essegian against Georgetown, and you get that for a whole season, like that's a really good player. But I think some of it is just working through some of these inconsistencies. And then Hoiberg, Sam Hoiberg will be back. After that, I don't know what I anticipate. They'll have those redshirt freshmen probably, and Nick Janowski and Brendan Frager. I think they're going to be on your bench and potentially involved in things next year. After that, does Ulis have another year?
Nope.
Okay, so he would be done.
I mean, Gavin Griffiths, people wonder about, but he hasn't went in yet.
Right.
And I'm not saying he will. He just hasn't, but he's on the team.
He's one of those guys where I wouldn't hate it if he stuck around. Because there's talent there. Like, I really do believe there's talent there, but Nebraska did not see much of it this past year. And then obviously the big name we're going to get to, especially in the Crown segment, is the strong play of Cale Jacobson. But just from the conversations I've had, Brian, I would look for Cale Jacobson to likely end up into the portal looking for an opportunity to play a lot more minutes somewhere else. So, but yeah, there's still quite a few pieces for Nebraska to add to this whole thing. But Pryce Sandfort, big first edition here. Let's talk some Crown. Let's talk some Crown. Nebraska has won each of their first two games in the Crown. Otherwise, they would have been eliminated. Now they have an opportunity to reach the finals. They play Boise State. It'll be at 12:30 on FS1 on Saturday. What have you made of the first couple games here in the Crown? And more than anything, I just want to give you as much time as you would like to take to talk about how much fun it is to still get to be able to watch Bryce Williams play basketball for Nebraska.
Yeah. I mean, I like the fact that this team, with this, especially for Bryce and Jawan, like, I really was a little concerned for them that they're going to go out there. If they lose that first game, it's a 6-game skid, and that is such a clunker. And so at least, they put that to bed. You got a couple wins, and now I feel like now it's like, okay, this is a interesting tournament going into the weekend because you've got the teams that are still kind of put together, as we'll get to with Boise State, who I think is going to be a tough challenge, could have been in the NCAA tournament. And so this is now an opportunity where, like, if you actually went and won the 2 games this weekend, like, I'm not saying it would match. Like, when I was a youngster and they won the NIT, it was actually a pretty big deal around here. People kind of got into it when they got to New York City and all that stuff. And because now I think the price of poker goes up and the teams are just better, there would be like a really satisfying feeling if they won these last 2 games or even get to the championship. So I'm glad they're to this point. I am enjoying watching Bryce just be smooth with it. And Gus Johnson enjoying his smoothness and all that stuff. And, he might also set the single season scoring record because they've played these games. He's like 30 away now, and he is tied for third with Tyronn Lue after the other night. So he's bumped himself up the charts in a significant way in sort of the Husker history books because of this tournament, actually.
And it's quite possible he's going to be on the first team All-Crown here by the end of it with his performance. So 30 points and then 28 points against Georgetown. I mentioned it earlier. Connor Essegian looked really good in the first half against Georgetown. And I do think we should mention both Arizona State, Georgetown, roster's a little bit depleted. It's not like you were catching the full version of either of those teams, but they still go play the game, and it's still on Nebraska to go win it. They won both of those, so I don't want to take anything away from it. But first half Conner-Essegian against Georgetown, I mean, he looked really good. He was taking guys off the dribble. Again, don't know how often you're going to be able to do that in the Big Ten in conference play, but he looked comfortable. He had rhythm when he was playing. That's a guy that, if not to do the bowl game thing where, if he can build off of this performance, what's it going to mean for the next year? But I think it's good for a guy like Conner-Essegian to stack some quality games here at the end, because imagine, Brian, if his season ended going 0 for 11 at home against Iowa in a game Nebraska needed to win to make the Big Ten tournament and didn't. At least here you get a chance to kind of like rinse that away and set yourself up for a fresh start next year.
Yeah, and not to beat a dead horse here, but I like to see him next year where he does feel like there's other shooter options where it's like, I don't have to make this necessarily because the other guy, you know what I mean? Like, obviously you want to make every shot, but there was sort of that pressure. Like, it would always be in the storylines, like, well, Connor's got to hit 3 of them, because who else is going to? And so hopefully that takes a little weight off his back. And I think he's got to be excited too with Mast returning. If he saw Nebraska play the year before and how Casey and guys, off screens and back cuts got easy layups. That's where I like to see Conner. And you mentioned the Georgetown game when he is scoring inside the arc and doing some of that stuff. That's my favorite thing, because I think of how that could be a weapon with Mast, especially next year, what he could get done there. So it's been good for him. Berke, it hasn't really taken off at this point. I'm with you on Berke, though. It's sort of a deal where I get
I'm not writing him off. I refuse to write him off. I think there's something there. I really do.
Well, you were there in South Dakota against St. Mary's, and those 10 minutes in that game where it was like 10 to 12 minutes where he was just like pretty dynamic with all the extra stuff, that goes into winning. And I can't shake that out of my head, because that was a really good team they were playing against. And
it was one of the better teams they played all year.
And I know he's such a tempting player because, like, if he could ever get consistency behind the arc, and I know they see it in practice, but if it happened, you'd be like, man, that guy would be tough in all categories. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if he can bring the other stuff up to like where it is, like sort of in that St. Mary's, there's a lot that he can offer you. So hopefully he has a good weekend against. They're going to need him to win these type of games, I think, to play well if they're going to win the tournament.
I think it's also important to acknowledge with somebody like Berke that, the version of Juwan Gary playing in the Crown right now didn't look like he did when he was a sophomore. The version of Keisei Tominaga that took Nebraska and helped him get to the NCAA tournament didn't look like that all the time as a sophomore. Bryce Williams was pretty darn good as soon as he got here, so that one doesn't work as well. But progression is different for different players. Like, there's nothing that says that he couldn't make a big jump in his game this summer. And I truly believe, and I know that you've talked with people too, that guy has been a really good practice player for Nebraska. It has not translated over to games, but I know early on in October, November, he was ripping things up in practice in terms of shooting, and it just had not translated. If for whatever reason that clicks going into next season, he becomes a pretty valuable player. And I like that picture of you add him with Mast and those shooters and Essegian and Sandfort. Like, you've got a guy who's got a really sort of interesting game. He's one of the rare bigs that has a mid-range jump shot. He can play inside. He can get rebounds for you. I think he has to work on his passing and overall basketball IQ, but there's definitely a lot that he can provide on both ends of the court. I mean, he's by far the best rebounder that they have this season. And so that's a guy that I would love to see him have a good game here against Boise State. If they make the finals, having an opportunity for a good game in that too, for him to have a little positive momentum as this thing comes to an end. Your thoughts on what we saw from Cale Jacobson? I know I mentioned earlier, kind of threw some cold water. I think there's some people that would love for him to stick around. We'll see what happens there. But played like 36 minutes against Georgetown, and just a stat sheet stuffing kind of game. Like 7 points, 6 rebounds, some assists. He had steals, he had blocks. Like it was pretty impressive, regardless of who he was going against. That was a guy that you just kind of let yourself like, wonder if they could have stolen another couple minutes this year with him on the court and been a little bit better for it.
Yeah. Plus 16, I think he was, in the plus minus for people who subscribe to that stat. So it felt like too in that game against Georgetown, there was like 2 moments where he had like a crafty YMCA bucket that, fundamentally saw it off the
through
square.
there.
Yeah, off the square. That meant a lot, including an and one. It was sort of in those moments because Georgetown kept coming back with their sharpshooter there, who had 25 and would get it within 8 or 10. And Kale was like one of those guys who's like, no, we're gonna stiff arm you away. And it is impressive though that he was like he's running the point at times, he's guarding the 5 at times on the other end of the floor. Not an easy thing to do at this level, no matter who the other side's putting out there. He was guarding one of Arizona State's best players throughout the season in that game. Guy who I think he just went in the portal too, by the way. So I don't know, but somebody to think about, I guess. But I am happy for Kale because I think his highest minutes were like 16, 18 minutes, before this tournament. And people love the story too. It's interesting. Everybody can be snarky about this tournament. People have been reading stuff that we've been writing about it, and Kale in particular. And I've noticed that. So Nebraska fans have kind of got like, okay, I'm going to get into it, and I'm enjoying the Kale sidebar part of it.
The game threads on the message board have been active. My group texts of basketball people have been like, in my world, anecdotally, people have been locked in on these games, even with start times that are a little bit later and games that go a little bit long. So we talk about this all the time. There is a real fervor for Nebraska basketball. People just desperately want it to be good. They want this team to be good. And it's a likable bunch for the most part. Like they have guys you want to root for. They have guys you want to watch. Going back to Kale, he had a couple passes in transition that he hit. I think it was Juwan Gary, where he just threw this laser of a pass between 2 Georgetown guys, and he hits Gary perfectly that he just throws down that dunk. Do you have any idea what I'm like? There was a couple passes that Kale had in transition where it's like, whoa, this guy can see the court really well too. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know where he's going to end up. Maybe he sticks at Nebraska. I'm certainly intrigued by what he can do. That guy can play in the Summit. There's no doubt in my mind he can play in the Summit League. Maybe Omaha needs to get on the horn.
Yeah, I'm sure he could. I mean, you never know what the dynamic is there too, though. A guy plays really well for a week, and maybe it changes like his outlook within the program. I think he wants to be. I don't know if he has said this, but I think people around him think he's like a future coach. Like he's got coaching tendencies, and so that sort of stuff always. I think it doesn't always, but it does sometimes factor into what guys want to do too, because they're thinking about that part as well. And like, where can I grow in my knowledge of the game? Who do I want to be around and all that stuff? So that'll be interesting to watch. It's just that day and age where, unfortunately, there's, it's just what it is. It's just, there's going to be that speculation and wondering like, okay, I wonder what this guy's future is. But I am happy for him as a guy who he had offers, out of high school. He could have had a couple scholarships, that he could have accepted, and he came here and walked on, and he's paid the price, and he's put in a lot of minutes, and they've always complimented him as to what he has meant to this team behind the scenes and how hard he works. So it's cool when a guy like that gets rewarded, and it makes the tournament, it gives just an extra boost to it too, for Nebraska. There's like that storyline where it's like, okay, I see the meaning behind just playing extra games. It doesn't that these memories are always going to matter to like Cale Jacobson and his family, that he's having a good week out there.
No doubt about it. All right, Brian, it's time. Will Nebraska make the Crown final? I'm not going to ask you if they're going to win it. I don't know if we'll do a podcast before the championship game, which is that on Monday or do they play that on
Sunday? Sunday.
All right.
Yeah,
So
Sunday
it's be the
afternoon.
first. They'll have to have rested legs. First time they have to play back-to-back days. So if they win, can they get by Boise State? What's your prediction?
I'm not gonna be throw cold water on this. I think it's a tough game. I think Boise has there a line out yet? I don't think I've seen one. I would say
No, it's
Boise.
usually basketball. Usually the night before or the day of.
They have the Final Four lines out, but they don't have the Crown Four out. That's a joke.
Kind of different.
I don't know.
Let me look. You talk. I'll look and see if I can find a line somewhere.
I would guess when the lines do come out, if they're not already, Boise will be favored by 4.5. That's like my prediction. I'm gonna pick.
We have lines.
Okay,
We do have lines.
What is it? What is it?
Boise favored 2.5.
2.5
total. 154.5. Nebraska money line, which tells you that they don't really believe in this a whole lot. And obviously, basketball being basketball, 2.5 isn't that much. Plus 115. So if you wanted to run over to a place that takes your money and put in a local bet on Nebraska, you can get a little extra for your bet.
I don't like to talk about gambling and sports a whole lot, but it feels like because it's in Las Vegas, you can lean into it a little bit. Big missed 3-pointer by Georgetown at the end, by the way. I think the line was 9.5.
Yeah, those free throws that came at the end there was both the Arizona State game and the Georgetown game came down right on that number. If you notice,
I've said this off the air, but I think it would be an amazing like Hunter S. Thompson, like old school Sports Illustrated back when it was Sports Illustrated type story to like go hang out with somebody who's betting way too much on the Crown in Las Vegas and just spend a few hours with it. But anyway, I will say Nebraska pulls the upset and moves into Sunday because why not?
Yeah. Look, I'm with you. I have Nebraska winning the whole thing. I think they're going to get it done. It should be fun here against Boise on Saturday. I just give me as many games as I get to watch with this group. So we'll see if they are able to get that done. And of course, we'll continue to cover everything they have going on in the transfer portal. Any final thoughts for you, Brian, here?
No, that should do it for me. We'll see what is next on the portal horizon, too. We'll have all the latest. Hoping to catch up with Pryce Sandfort and talk about his decision, and hope that's on the site here throughout the weekend. So a lot of stuff, both, basketball, spring football, all that recruiting, it's happening.
All right. Well, be sure to check out everything we got going on at Husker247.com. We'll be back next week with more Husker 24/7 podcast content.